Welcome back. There is Scott Nelson's defense attorney delivering his closing argument. He says that his client never had any intent to kill Jennifer Fulford. He says he said as much on the stand yesterday. All right, so the defense attorney there summing up his closing argument in which he said, look, his client never intended to kill Jennifer Fulford. In fact, he said he panicked when she started making noise when she was in the back of his car, and that's why he ended up stabbing her. He called into question some of the forensic evidence that about whether she was really, in fact, sort of tortured or not. So what do we think of this and how it has measured up to the prosecution's closing? Wendy Patrick, trial attorney, is still with us via Skype from California. And Wendy, what is your take so far when you weigh these two against each other?
What he's basically doing, Stacey, is what any defense attorney would do with these facts, making the closing about lesser offenses. It's not first-degree murder, it's second-degree murder. It's not really kidnapping, it's false imprisonment. It's not robbery, it's petty theft. Petty theft, by the way, is the least of Mr. Nelson's problems in a case with facts like this. But he's basically laying it out very very methodically, very logically. What he's attempting to do is draw the sting of the emotion that was very present in the personal details that were provided by the prosecutor in her closing argument. That's very important because this is a heartbreaking case for those jurors who have had to sit and listen to these facts. So he's really undertaking a clinical analysis of the jury instructions designed to show those jurors that they have options. But that might be more effective in a case where you have a sympathetic defendant. The question will be, has Mr. Nelson portrayed himself as sympathetic enough for the jurors to want to, even if the evidence warranted it, to be able to avail themselves of those lesser options?
Right. You're absolutely right. I mean, how did the jury sort of read him and interpret him? Did they find any sympathy there for them? I want to bring in another guest I have this hour joining us, Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death investigator, also joining us via Skype. And Joseph, I know you just sort of joined us towards the end of this closing argument from the defense attorney, but since you know your forensics well, I mean, one thing obviously that the prosecution tried to play up here, we know this was a heartbreaking case, as Wendy said. I mean, a random violent crime, and this woman ends up stabbed to death. And he says, look, well, it was a serrated knife, and the medical examiner, information doesn't exactly match up, the wounds with what the prosecution is telling you. So maybe this wasn't so torturous. What do you make of that argument?
Again, I'm baffled by this. This guy showed up loaded for bear, if you will. He essentially showed up with the instrumentalities of death, and it's not, the knife cannot be just solely focused on. There's an asphyxial element to this that goes to torture, as far as I'm concerned, with the duct tape wrapped around this woman's mouth and this binding that she had, this utter horror that she was subjected to. I don't know that there's any way the defense can diminish what happened. And then his open admittance to this on the stand. As far as serrated versus non-serrated weapons, again, it's, he's attempting, again, as I stated with Jesse earlier this week, to see how many angels he can get to dance on the head of a pin. I think that it's a very, very thin argument.
Yeah, and we'll see if the jury agrees there. Well, Joseph, stick around. Wendy, I want to thank you for joining us this morning and giving us your great analysis on this case as we watch to see what happens. We know there's a brief recess, and when we come back, the judge is going to be delivering some jury instructions. So that is his defense, his explanation, if you will. It was all Julio Dominguez's fault. Just a little bit of backstory of what we heard after this. The defendant alleges he had come out of jail. He had a probation officer. He was finding it difficult to live and work. He finally gets a job as a painter for someone in the Orlando area. And this man who owns the painting company allows him to live at sort of a space he has in a garage as well. Well, Nelson says this probation officer, Julio Dominguez, went to his employer and said, what are you doing letting this guy live with you and work for you? And so he was fired. He said it was all Julio Dominguez's fault for essentially ruining his life, getting him thrown out on the street again. He said this is what the government does. He went on and on about this, and so he took his anger for the federal government and redirected it to this innocent woman. I want to bring in our guest this morning, Joseph Scott Morgan, joining us live via Skype. I mean, we just listened to a little snippet of it there, but I mean, how does this sit with jurors, in your opinion?
Oh, Lord. You know, he's deflecting here, I guess, in an attempt. He knows that his life is on the line, Stacey. You know, I go back to what the defense attorney was saying just a few moments ago in his summation. He said you can only kick a dog so long, and they're going to respond.
Right.
And
of course, bite back.
You know,
yeah.
And of course, you start diminishing a true victim, like this poor woman, and you begin to refer to her in these terms that she is no more than collateral damage, that her precious life was snuffed out because he wanted to target somebody else, and he was just acting out, if you will. Again, I go back to this. I think this guy is on very thin ice with this jury. And, you know, but, you know, let the cards fall where they may. He chose to get up on the stand. So, as my grandpa used to say, it's his mule, let him ride it. We'll see where it goes.
I like that statement. Let's listen to a little bit more of what Nelson said on the stand. Wow. Well, the prosecutor here showing kind of that she, too, is perplexed by this explanation. So you went after this woman you'd never met before, a total stranger, because you're mad at the government, she said, instead of sort of taking the normal course of actions, trying to register your complaints. Now, no doubt, you know, for anyone who's been in the criminal justice system and trying to make it afterwards, like, imagine that it can be difficult and probably hard to get your case heard against versus, say, a probation officer. However, this is not a logical alternative. Joseph, what do you make of the answers, you know, he gave here? First of all, his demeanor, he's so matter of fact about it, as if, yeah, this is what I did. Of course, this makes sense.
Yeah, it's his demeanor is very flat. His affect is very flat. It takes me back to, you know, thinking about the allocution that BTK gave all those years ago in court, where it was just, you know, it's a matter of doing business. I think that the defense failed in this particular case with this guy. Of course, you know, the defendant is going to do what they're going to do, is probably against their advice. But I don't know. Maybe they should have thought to go down the road of diminished capacity, or, you know, mental defect, or, you know, something other than this, because I think that what is resonating with the jury is that term again, collateral. This woman was not collateral. She was loved. She had a husband that adored her. She had people that she, listen, Stacey, if you're going to pick on somebody, this is the wrong person to pick on. She had people in her life that she was taking care of. Yeah. She's not some monster. He just absolutely obliterated this woman.
And I mean, you know, to your point, his affect is very flat, and he's very matter of fact. And as you said, he you know, preyed on this absolutely innocent woman here. What you know, so here he is. You know, he's confessed. He said that the defense maybe didn't you know, handle it right, but so some have said, well, at this point he's just trying to argue for his life because this is a death penalty case. But from what you heard here so far, and obviously we're not even at the penalty phase yet, from what you heard so far here, is he helping his case in any way here, whether to spare himself from the death penalty or not?
Yeah, I know, and you know, as we know down in Florida, they're quick to give you the needle, and they don't tolerate this sort of thing as readily as might some other states. And let's think of this as well. You know, this is a pure case. If you look at the evidence that's involved with this, the stuff that was outlined by the ME in this case, these injuries that she sustained to her body, this is a case of overkill. The mechanism here is obviously he stabbed her multiple times, striking her heart with a blade that was sufficient to the task. And you've got this weird combination of having her airway occluded, if you will, along with the stab wounds that she sustained. And it leads to the heart of this real pain and suffering. And I'm hoping that in rebuttal, the rebuttal closing that the prosecution, I hope that they bring the focus back to this poor woman.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you there that it does at parts when we start getting into this guy's story, right, about the probation officer and how he claims he's been so wronged by the government, by the world, really, that we do start to lose sight a little bit of the victim. I think in the prosecution's closing, they did sort of try to bring it back to her a little bit. But clearly here, his story sort of stole the show, so to speak. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, there is lots more to discuss about this. Stay with us.